When you hear the word Titanic, what do you see? You see a grand staircase, a sweeping love story, a tragic, cinematic romance. You see a majestic giant, the pinnacle of human engineering, brought down by a freak accident, a cool twist of fate in the icy North Atlantic. That is a lie. It is a beautiful, romantic, and comfortable lie that has been told for over 100 years to hide a much darker and more disturbing truth. The Titanic was not a victim of fate. It was a victim of arrogance, greed, and a series of criminally incompetent decisions that turned the world's most luxurious ship into a floating death trap long before it ever hit an iceberg. You are about to discover the story you were never told. A story of ignored warnings, of fatal design flaws, of fire that had been burning in its hull since it left the dock, and of the bizarre, almost supernatural premonitions that foretold the disaster. This is not a love story. This is the real, horrifying story of the Titanic. Let's start with a secret that was hidden from the public for almost a century. The Titanic was on fire from the moment it left port. Deep within the ship's massive hull, in coal bunker number 6, a fire had started days before the maiden voyage. This was not a small fire. It was a deep, smoldering coal fire, burning at over 1,000 degrees Celsius. The crew knew about it. The ship's officers knew about it. And J. Bruce's maid, the chairman of the White Star Line who was on board, almost certainly knew about it. What did they do? Did they delay the voyage? Did they extinguish it properly? No, that would have been expensive and embarrassing. Instead, they made a fatal decision. They would sail anyway, and they would try to control the fire at sea by having the stokers feed the burning coal directly into the ship's furnaces. Here's where the story gets truly horrifying. The fire was located right up against the forward watertight bulkhead, one of the key structural walls designed to keep the ship afloat in a disaster. For days, this critical piece of steel was being superheated, weakening it, making it brittle and fragile. So when the Titanic struck the iceberg, it didn't just hit a random part of the hull. The impact occurred in the exact same area where the bulkhead had been slowly cooked for a week. Many modern experts believe that without the fire, the bulkhead would have held, or at least crumpled, buying the ship precious hours. Instead, weakened by the fire, it likely shattered like glass on impact. The Unsinkable ship was already critically wounded before it ever saw a single piece of ice. They were sailing a ticking time bomb, all for the sake of profit and punctuality. The iceberg should have been seen. In the freezing, clear, moonless night of April 14th, a massive object like an iceberg should have been spotted far sooner. So why wasn't it? The answer is a story of pure criminal incompetence. The lookouts in the Crow's Nest, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, were missing their most crucial piece of equipment, the binoculars. The binoculars of the Crow's Nest were locked in a storage locker, and the key was in the pocket of Second Officer David Blair. But just before the ship set sail from Southampton, there was a last-minute crew reshuffle. Blair was bumped from the maiden voyage, and in his haste to disembark, he forgot to hand over the key. So the two men responsible for spotting danger on the world's most advanced ship were forced to rely on the naked eye, in the dark, in the middle of the most dangerous ice field in the world. When asked at the official inquiry what would have happened if they'd had their binoculars, Frederick Fleet gave a chilling, heartbreaking answer. We could have seen it a bit sooner, enough to get out of the way. The greatest maritime disaster in history was not caused by an act of God. It may have been caused by a single, forgotten key. Even after the iceberg was spotted, the disaster was not inevitable. It was cemented by a single, catastrophic decision made on the bridge. When the warning came, First Officer William Murdoch gave the now infamous order, hard to starboard. This was standard procedure. You see an obstacle, you turn the rudder hard to steer the ship far away from it. But the Titanic was not a normal ship. It was the largest moving object ever created by man. It had immense inertia. Turning its bow away from the iceberg would cause its stern to swing around directly towards it. This is basic physics. Even worse, Murdoch simultaneously ordered the engines to be reversed. This was another fatal error. Reversing the engines of a massive steamship doesn't act like brakes. It actually reduces the effectiveness of the rudder, making the turn even slower and wider. So what was the result? Instead of a direct, head-on collision, which modern engineers believe the Titanic would have easily survived, Murdoch's maneuver ensured the worst possible outcome. The iceberg scraped along the side of the ship for 300 feet, opening up not one, but 6 of its forward compartments to the sea. It was like a giant can opener. The Unsinkable ship was designed to survive with 4 compartments breached. 6 was a death sentence. The very actions taken to save the ship are what, in fact, condemned it to sink. Here is where the story descends from a tragedy of errors into a surreal nightmare. For the first hour after the collision, most of the passengers had no idea they were in mortal danger. The impact was described as a slight shudder. The ship was a city of light and music in the middle of a calm, dark sea. The band famously played on deck, not to calm panicked passengers, but because, initially, there was no panic. First-class passengers joked about the ice on the deck, throwing chunks at each other. The bars remained open. People were more annoyed that the ship had stopped than they were afraid. This created a deadly sense of false security. When the crew finally began loading the lifeboats, they were faced with a bizarre problem. Nobody wanted to get in them. The lifeboats looked small and unsafe compared to the massive, brightly lit deck of the Unsinkable ship. The first lifeboat, which had a capacity for 65 people, was launched with only 28 people on board. Another, with a capacity of 40, was launched with only 12. Hundreds of people, especially in third class, who had a chance to get into a lifeboat in that first hour, were doomed because they simply didn't believe and weren't properly told that the greatest ship in the world was actually sinking beneath their feet. They died because of the lie of the ship's own marketing. Perhaps the most haunting and least told part of the Titanic story is this. They were not alone in the dark. Less than 20 miles away, another ship, the SS Californian, had stopped for the night, trapped by the same ice field. Its lights were visible on the horizon. The crew of the Titanic saw them, and the crew of the Californian saw the Titanic. As the Titanic began to sink, it fired a series of white distress rockets into the night sky. The crew of the Californian saw the rockets. They woke up their captain, Stanley Lord, to report them. But Lord, in a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life, dismissed them. He concluded they were just company signals, fireworks from a party on the luxury liner. He went back to sleep. The radio operator on the Californian had already turned off his set for the night, just minutes before the Titanic's frantic SOS calls began. He was asleep while Jack Phillips on the Titanic was desperately tapping out the last messages the world would ever receive from the dying ship. For over an hour, the crew of one ship watched the strange lights of another, firing rockets and slowly sinking into the sea, and it did absolutely nothing. They were close enough to have saved almost every single person on board. Instead, they just watched. So what was the Titanic? It was a monument to hubris. A floating Tower of Babel. A ship so obsessed with its own myth of invincibility that it sailed blind, on fire, and underprepared into the one place on Earth it should have feared. But here's the final, chilling, and almost supernatural twist to the story. 14 years before the Titanic was even designed, in 1898, a little-known author named Morgan Robertson wrote a novel. The novel was about a massive, unsinkable British ocean liner, the largest in the world. It was filled with the rich and famous. On a cold April night, while sailing at high speed in the North Atlantic, it struck an iceberg and sank. The ship in the novel also did not have enough lifeboats for all its passengers, resulting in a catastrophic loss of life. The name of the fictional ship in this book, written 14 years before the disaster, it was called the Titan. The story of the Titanic is not a story of fate. It is a cautionary tale, a horrifying reminder that the greatest dangers we face are not the icebergs we can see in the distance, but the arrogance, greed, and incompetence that we carry with us on board.